Hey everyone, and thanks so much for joining me for this creative session. My name is Christi du Toit, and I'm a freelance illustrator and designer currently living and working professionally in the beautiful city of Cape Town, South Africa. I've been working in the creative industry for a good few years now, and I've loved every moment of it. As a kid, all I wanted to do was draw all day long, and as an adult, well, let's just say nothing's changed. My work themes can vary from quirky and cartoony to dark and creepy, but always have a gritty and sort of perfectly imperfect look that you can only really achieve through drawing by hand. The process we'll be working through in this video really covers a slightly downsized example of the same approach I take for almost all my client projects, whether that's for bands, brands, advertising, personal work, or pretty much anything. I've been using Affinity software as part of my daily workflow for about 2 years now, and today we'll be using Designer for desktop to create some artwork for a band. While Designer is obviously primarily a vector app, I actually tend to do most of my illustration work in the Pixel persona and then use the tools in the Designer persona more for things like layout, typography, logos, and the likes. The band we'll be working with is actually an old solo side project of mine called Lunar Rift. It's an instrumental rock and heavy metal band that sadly fell by the wayside, but I thought it might be a nice excuse to create a fictional brief to treat as if it were for a real existing client and then kind of take you guys along for the journey. We need to create a versatile graphic for Lunar Rift to accompany the latest release for a track called Cycles. The title refers to moon cycles, and the band's branding has often used visuals relating to alchemy and neo-traditional tattoo imagery in the past, which I think is a great starting point for our planning. Thematically, while the band is heavy, it doesn't take itself too seriously, which is also a great opportunity to bring some stylization in to help keep things from getting just too dark and dreary. The graphic will first and foremost be used on the cover for the single, but we'll take it a step further and assume that the illustration will also be used on shirts and potentially stickers too. I often start my projects with lists of keywords to help me stay on brief. Since this is an instrumental band, we don't really have any lyrics to spark ideas, so it's our job to come up with an engaging graphic that captures the general vibe in a visual way. In this case, I think it's safe to say that the following keywords will definitely be important based on the brief. Moon cycles to hint at the track title, the alchemy theme, and also the band's name, which includes the word lunar. Arrows and daggers, which links directly to the tattoo theme, and lastly skulls, which also links to the tattoo theme, but skulls are, pretty timelessly rad, and they usually feel very at home in metal band artwork. I've done a few mini studies of these elements just to sort of familiarize myself with the subject matter. This can often lead to finding interesting and pleasing ways to combine and compose these elements before diving in the deep end, I guess in the same way that you would need to learn the alphabet before you can read or write. The next step is to take these keywords and studies into consideration as we work on a few rough drawings just to get the project off of the ground. I like to do these on paper with pen or pencil, as there's no pressure for anything to be overly perfect, and that kind of helps me draw more freely and focus on the idea rather than a polished execution this early on. To me, this is the most important part in the project, as everything we'll end up doing will be based on the creative decisions we make here. I usually fill pages with these scamps, but for the sake of time, I focused on 2 main ideas. I liked the dagger idea in option 1, but ultimately I thought that option 2 felt a bit more well-rounded, and it kind of has a nice underlying geometric construction that helps the artwork feel more solid and well-balanced. The fact that the composition comfortably fits into square and circular formats is important, and will also make it extra versatile for use on the album cover, for social media, stickers, and other applications without too much post-editing and tinkering. Working with option 2, I'll start by cleaning the sketch up. I've drawn it up in pencil, but I wanted to make a few small revisions before diving into the final execution, which I'll be doing using a graphics tablet. I have an XP Pen display tablet, but really any tablet will do just fine as long as you can draw with it. This also includes an iPad and Apple Pencil combo, which seems to be very popular these days. I've scanned the artbook and I've opened it in Designer's Pixel persona. Using the pencil brush included in my free Affinity raster brushes, I'll go ahead and make a few minor edits. I'm also switching back to the Designer persona to finalize the lettering for the band name so that we can focus more on the illustration in the next phase. Overall, I try to keep my pencils very tight. While learning, I heard a quote from a great comic book artist, Neil Adams, that read something along the lines of, "The cleaner your pencils are, the better your inks will be, because you'll focus less on drawing and more on the quality of the lines." And I think that's really stuck with me over the years. For this reason, I try and work out all of the kinks early on in the sketch phase. Before we start the final execution, we need to set our file up. While album covers are generally on the smaller side, we need to remember that the artwork's also going to be used in other formats as well. Since we're not working in vector, let's keep things fairly large to sort of future-proof the artwork. I think A3 is a pretty safe size for t-shirts, and since the album is a square, let's make it 42 by 42 centimeters at 300 dpi. I've dropped the sketch into the document and made it a light blue so that we can easily ink over it. Now we're ready for the final line art. A quick tip before we start is not to zoom in too much while drawing, as you'll get caught up in the small details when you should be focusing on the illustration as a whole. You wouldn't draw traditionally with a magnifying glass, and I guess digital drawing shouldn't be any different. I tend to pick a zoom level that I'm comfortable with, and I tend to stick with it for the majority of the artwork just for consistency's sake, though I do tend to rotate the canvas quite a lot. I also find that not zooming in too much helps me focus on making calculated marks with my brush rather than mindlessly drawing lines just for the sake of adding detail that doesn't really contribute to the illustration. For the line work itself, I mostly use a 3-step inking process for my drawings, which you'll see me do in this video as well. I start with the outlines and separating lines, as they help create a solid foundation to contain the rest of the details. I take special consideration in thinking about line weights here. I already know where my light source is, so all the lines facing away from the light will be slightly thicker to establish a sort of sense of three-dimensionality. The next step is to fill the dark shadow shapes. I tend to keep these shapes fairly abstract and simple for visual appeal. Last but not least, we'll work on the rendering. I'm a big fan of comic book art, so I tend to use a lot of fine hatched lines to create details and depth. This is a personal preference, and there are many ways that you can achieve this, such as using textures and halftones. You can really use whatever you like or feel works best for you and your style. On a layer below our line art, we'll be creating our flat colors. I use the freehand selection tool for this task just to speed things up a little bit. I don't want to go too vibrant with the hues, as this is for a metal band, but I do want to have at least one accent color to help our focal elements stand out. Colors say a lot about the mood and emotion of an illustration, so be sure to consider that before committing to any final color palettes. I've used colors that reminded me of the moon and the night sky for the majority of the work, and added a bright blue to the eye to draw attention, but also to add a slight mystical and science fiction-esque look to the piece. For the shadows, I'll create a new layer above the flats and set it to multiply. I like to use a vector shape with the mask for this so that I can easily tweak the color if necessary. Painting on the layer mask with black or white will either hide or show the content on that layer. The mask here does the same job as a clipping mask, but because our individual colors are separated onto individual layers, a traditional clipping mask wouldn't work as well in this case. I prefer starting with the artwork in full shadow and then carving out the lighting using the freehand selection tool and a soft round brush. In comics, this technique is called the cut and grad and was popularized in the 90s, and I guess it's still pretty widely used to this day. To finish off, I'll add in a few specular highlights for areas that are particularly reflective. There's not too much to say here. I'm just running through the artwork to add my final tweaks and to make sure that everything is properly aligned and good to go. This simple step can often make or break a piece, so make sure that you approach it with special care and consideration. Keep these tweaks minor and be sure to slam the brakes when you feel like you're beginning to go overboard. When you start struggling to find things to fix or touch up, it's usually a pretty good indication that your job is done. Our artwork is technically done now, but we still need to show our client. I've created a presentation PDF that I'll use to present the work. I've added the album cover as well as a mini mock-up. In this, I'll also include the t-shirt and sticker previews for the client to see before committing to anything. For the shirt, a nice big and bold black and white backprint could look great, with the band logo on the front as a pocket print. For the sticker, we'll keep it simple by using a round holding shape which contains the main graphic. We're all set up and ready to go now. If the client signs off on this, you can go ahead and set the final artwork up in all the necessary formats they need to bring this project to life. I found that for digital releases, a 3000 by 3000 pixel JPEG is usually perfect. For print, PDF is usually a good go-to option. To create the artwork in this project, I've used my free Lockdown Liners Affinity brushes, which are included as a downloadable resource in the video description. I've also used a few splatter and halftone brushes from my Comics Toolbox brush pack for effects, but these aren't absolutely necessary and are more of a personal and stylistic touch. Everything else are stock standard tools that come by default with Affinity Designer. I really hope that you enjoyed this project walkthrough and learned a few new tricks. If you decide to do your own version of a Lunarift album cover, please be sure to tag me on Instagram at Christi du Toit. I'd love to see what you come up with. Obviously, a very special thank you goes out to Serif for having me on board for Affinity's creative sessions and for making such awesome software. Alright guys, that's a wrap. Stay creative, stay safe, and stay rad. Peace.